Welcome, Dion Chang. We are exceedingly and extremely excited to have you on Biz Trends 2023. Welcome.
Hi, Rutendo, and lovely to speak to you again.
Fantastic. So, Dion, your Flux Trend briefing, the state we're in, has to be one of the most phenomenal reports I ever read so far this year. And what you actually speak about is the great unraveling. And how in 2022 there was actually the sense of loss of reality. But in general, right now in the world, there is this unraveling. What exactly do you mean by the great unraveling?
All right, so the Collins Dictionary word of the year last year was permacrisis, and they started Davos in 2023 talking about polycrisis. So, in essence, permacrisis or polycrisis just denotes that we're almost in a constant state of crises. And it's felt like that for the past 3 years. I think last year was meant to be this year of recalibration. We were sort of easing out of the pandemic, things were opening up again, and things were going to be all hunky-dory and okay. Then we had a war, which is still going on. We've had supply chains that are being disrupted. And we've just seen economies all around the world. Inflation's going through the roof. South Africa has its own charming problems with energy. So it just kind of continues. So we are adapting, in essence, to this feeling of permacrisis. But for me, if I step back and look and just sort of all the trends we've tracked over the years, the great unraveling, what I want to point out is the permacrisis doesn't just happen in isolation. It is a steady, there's a whole lot of disparate things that go wrong. So the whole sum of it is kind of bigger than the smaller crises we see. But for me, from a trends point of view, is we're starting to see old systems fundamentally break down, break away. So parts of the economy, the world of work. I do a lot of stuff with corporates in terms of, whether it's remote working, 4-day work week, quiet quitting, all of those kind of trends that were that came up last year. But these are all indications that systems that should be replaced are being replaced. And what we're seeing is a lot of resistance to that. So there's a lot of kicking of a dying horse, so to speak, to resist those kind of things. But the unraveling is happening, and that's what we are feeling around us, not in South Africa, but around the world.
It's very interesting you speak about those old systems. And in this world of AI and ChatGPT and remote working, we've really had to almost just dive in and get used to it very quickly. One of the things I want to touch on from your report is you also mention factors such as an algorithm that won an art contest. And we are looking at things like dark advertising and how it's stalking us, ongoing conversations about whether the metaverse is a thing or isn't a thing. And are these some of the aspects that are actually contributing to the poly crisis?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what we're starting to see is that advancement of tech. And even during the pandemic, one of the previous statements that we put out was the fact that a contactless economy started to grow. So we were in lockdown. We started getting used to more online shopping, e-commerce. That really sort of, grew exponentially. But within that, we started relying a lot more on the machine. So that was more sort of automation, robotics, all of those kind of things. And if the metaverse was the big topic last year, then AI and generative AI specifically, like ChatGPT, as you mentioned, is going to be the really big thing. And the little things that are in that report are just those blimps on the radar, which are going to get louder and louder and louder. So, not only did an AI win an art competition, you started to see generative AI before ChatGPT was launched. And now it's in a very, very short space of time. I mean, literally in 2 months, people are saying, I saw something on Twitter saying, well, if you in a work mode and you use ChatGPT to become more efficient, so generative AI makes you more efficient. But if somebody in school asks the ChatGPT to write an answer for something, that means you're cheating. And he was saying we have to rethink education, which does beg a question. So all of these, if you aren't getting rid of or exiting an old system, you are going to be challenged by all these new technologies to make that switch and look for different solutions as well.
Mm. And thank you so much for pointing out some real kind of examples that we can look into, because the reality is, and to your point, these are things that are impacting our day to day lives. And it's almost like if you don't get on board, you will risk being left behind. You spoke a little bit about resistance. What is the actual impact that this is having on people's personal lives, businesses, and how are people responding?
So that's an interesting question, because it's a lot of people just look at the technologies, but when I talk about systems, it is just say the whole foundation of which corporate workforces stand on. So a 9 to 5, 40-hour work week, you come into a location-based headquarters, it's bumps on seats, we can see you, which means a 9 to 5 work hour means you have that much productivity, and everybody in an office knows that that's not true. So it's also just different ways of doing things. So your different systems, not necessarily the technology will enable that, but there are a lot of different systems that we're starting to have to question. So it's exactly that in terms of workforces or the future of work. Most of my conversations with our clients last year was about switching from time-based management to say, okay, well, these hours equal so much productivity, to more outcome-based systems to say, I want this delivered on this date. I don't care when you do it, how you do it. Just give me the best work and deliver it on that day. And we're starting to see the convergence of, say, a younger Gen Z workforce that are really sort of coming into the workplace. That is the mindset that they are used to and want to work with. So it's not a fact that this new generation has to adapt to an old system. It is more, for me, an old system that has to relook a better way of doing things and a more efficient way of doing things. And those are what's bubbling up now.
It's very, very interesting you mentioned that, because all across social media, you're seeing Gen Z starting to enter the workforce, and there are all these memes and parodies and sketches of the balance between Gen Z and more older generations and what's happening in the workforce. And it's very interesting, some of those aspects that you mentioned. It's not necessarily a case of Gen Z adapting to the way things used to be, but more of how historical companies or these major corporations who had these very expensive, leases or actual buildings that they rented. Now, even looking at aspects of going remote work from home, outcomes based work, which you've spoken about, which is absolutely incredible, because a number of people have side hustles and are using all of these different systems and technology. So while it is still very exciting, it's also a bit daunting, I think, for people who aren't necessarily used to that. How would you actually recommend that brands help and almost reassure people about the way that things are starting to move and progress? Because it can be something that you almost could say to yourself, "That's not for me. I'm just going to stick to the way that things are." But how do brands need to, or how can they rather reassure people that the world is still a great place, a cool place, and you've kind of just got to go with the flow?
Yeah, so I mean, the whole concept of mass customization started creeping in the past decade or so, 5 years ago, where it was more about product. So you customize an outfit, a T-shirt, a bag, or whatever for that customer. And even say 5 years ago, people said, no, it's not possible to do mass customization. But now, with new technologies, automation, all of those kind of things, we know that that's really possible. So it's to take that thought about mass customization from a product into a service, because the reality is, and I know a lot of people who are watching this are going to say, well, we don't have the manpower to do that, or the people power, let's say that, to be able to do that. It's a lot more work, it's a lot more resources. But unfortunately, we are in that phase where you need to customize a service for different parts of your demographics that you serve. It is, so to put it in another way, it's when I talk to leadership in terms of corporate, you talk about ambidextrous leadership. So you have to bring in new concepts, new technologies, and everything, but you've got to keep steering the ship, and so you don't lose that institutional memory and that knowledge. So the same thing with brands and marketing is you have to kind of keep the ship afloat. You have to keep the core, whatever your core customer is. If it's an older customer, you've got to keep them happy, but you still have to bring in new systems, new technologies, so that you can remain competitive. Otherwise, you're going to eat your competitors' dust if you don't do that. So it's a very, very delicate balance to be able to do that. But things are changing so rapidly that to not be able to even attempt some kind of ambidextrous leadership is going to be very, very detrimental to your business or to your brand. And I think what you just touched on there is how do you almost reassure people in this era of unraveling that things are okay and everything. So, we've understood in the past couple of years that if you solve a problem, you've got a business. So now that mantra of solving a problem is just ramped up. It has to be core and center of everything you do. Not to say, disregard what products you sell, but really, really that service, the more we go online, the more we have a contactless economy within retail, the more you have to up those service levels and make sure whatever touch points you have are going to be serviced as well. So whether it's an online e-commerce order or somebody that comes into a bricks and mortar space, that level of service, that seamlessness, and that intuitive way of just dealing with going through a sale or something like that has to really, really be there. So we've been advocating for our clients in the last, ever since the pandemic really struck, is to really invest in UX, your user experience, whether it's online, training staff, offline, all of those kind of things, that becomes hyper important in an era of polycrisis or permacrisis.
Very interesting. And as corporates and brands and companies start to join the bandwagon and start to implement all of these innovations, ultimately, what is the economic knock-on effect?
All right, so that one's, oh gosh, that's a multi-layered question, because so overall we know that economies are battered. It's kind of post-pandemic recovery, but now it's also the global effect of a war. But now it is also on top of that is we are seeing 2021 and 2022 was very clear in terms of Mother Nature's messaging that climate change is not something that a tree hugger or some activist is shouting about. It is starting to impact our supply chains. It's starting to impact the way in which we are able to move things around the place. In South Africa, we've just seen cold storage with load shedding, everything is impacting your agricultural sector, not only sort of your fruits and vegetables, but also chickens. So, the culling of little chicks because you can't keep them warm with incubators, all of those kind of things. This becomes challenge upon challenge upon challenge. So it becomes a really, really, really big way of having to deal with those problems. But in terms of finding solutions for that is to not only look at broader innovations around the world, but to understand that you are also part of a big network, because we would not have sort of put together the problem with chickens or something, and there's an egg shortage. It's called eggflation around the world as well. That's not only from the shortage of energy, but it's also about avian flu. So we're getting diseases, we're getting climate change, we're getting all of these things. So it's really coming at people from every single direction. And you have to be, I don't like using the word because I think South Africans are tired of being called resilient, but you have to be ultra resilient, and you've got to keep thinking ahead and just keep one step ahead of the pace and track for whatever solutions that you are. It's not going to help you to sit by and complain that all of these changes are happening. You have to engage. You have to find out what can I do about it, whatever small way I can.
Most definitely. And when it comes to, technological changes or changes in technology and developments, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, that's something that's happening overseas or that's happening in a different country. How does South Africa compare to the rest of the world or to the world at large when it comes to these technological advancements?
So So, in some respects, yes, it's true that we lag a little bit behind, but then in other respects, we leapfrog. So, specifically fintech, that we've leapfrog there. We have very very different problems and major problems. So ironically, the shortage of energy, load shedding, all of those kind of things, we've experienced on the African continent. So in a lot of respects, we have solutions which the developed world don't do. And it's very ironic that you're getting, because of power supplies and gas supplies, people to say conserve energy, in Europe, conserve water. Cape Town went through 2018 with almost no water of that year. So we're actually launching an innovation to it to say to come to Africa to see the future, because we've had to deal with solution-based innovation much on a much higher level than the developed world really, really has. So we actually have some solutions to that. So that being said, yes, we do lag behind in some things. Sometimes we don't have the resources or the infrastructure to be able to do things, but we will find a different way of doing things. But don't ever assume that Africa lags so behind, so you can just rest on your laurels and say, okay, no, that's fine. People aren't going to, adopt to this new technology or new system. People will, and specifically, if I go back to my passion, your Gen Zs, that's the generation that is going to be the change makers. They are going to make those big changes. They're going to leapfrog those technologies, and we're starting to see them. If we just go onto a leadership point of view, you mentioned that they are, fully coming into the workforce. But what we've noticed and what we're picking up is that Gen Z, more than millennials, are actually going into government and into policy making in a much earlier age than millennials were. So you have this young generation who is very passionate about social justice, all of those kind of barometers, climate change, everything, but they are moving a lot quicker into those corridors of power to be able to make change and not just protest from armchairs.
It is very interesting. It's going to be very fascinating to see what a world led by Gen Z looks like in the future. I'd be interested to know, in your report, the state we're in, what was the most surprising thing that you saw come out of the briefing?
I think it was the kind, and I think it happened really subtly. I mentioned that the pandemic sort of grew a contactless economy, and we started just allowing the algorithms, the automation to kind of take over there. And I think what really came out for me was the fact that with the world in such disarray, with this unraveling, you started to see people's attention kind of move to just surviving and finding new solutions for that. And within that space, we just allowed tech to kind of slip in through the back door and kind of take over. So for me, it wasn't so much that the tech was in the room, but it was how much do we want tech to design the future rather than us being proactive about it and not just relying on the tech to be able to do that. So that's why the report is about the great unraveling, but also the rise of the machines, because you're really, really seeing the rise of the machines to do that. And it's good and bad. So we talked about ChatGPT, so you can generate things really, really quickly. But on the other hand, you can also see algorithms that will pay out for disaster funding from climate change. So you've got hurricanes and things there. Because of the technology, you can map this via satellite, and AI will know that this area is completely devastated. So you can have some kind of artificial intelligence that just says, okay, release disaster funding to people in that area, and it can be done automatically. So there's good and bad sides to it. We're at such a new stage of all of this stuff. There's a double-edged sword with everything. So venture forth, embrace it, but with a little bit of reservation.
And then, final question is, when it comes back to the marketing and communications industry in general, do you feel that these crises are going to show, and are we going to see a breakthrough in the thinking, in the innovation, and how people are approaching marketing and communications?
I think definitely, because we've always said, especially with the rise of social media over the last decade, you will sniff inauthenticity a mile away. On social media, whether it's an influencer on Instagram or something, trying to push a product without being seeming that they're being paid for it, people will sniff that inauthenticity a mile away. So I think what is required now is brands really, really looking at that solution solving way of doing things. So it's not just to push a product onto me. Don't try and sell me something. Don't give me hard sell. Tell me how you're going to fix something, and tell me how it's going to make the world a better place and help the world's problems. And I think, especially, I'll go back to Gen Z again. You're starting to see if this generation is coming of age or has come of age during the pandemic, and that social justice barometer is so high, the way in which marketers and brands are pushing out messages, we've already seen that there's changes in which there's pushback in how things are done. But with permacrisis and unraveling, you really need brands to say, I'm on your side, I'm helping you. I'm not just trying to pimp a product to you, and I'm not just trying to sell something to you. I really want to be part of that solution there. And I think that's the best way in which to do it. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to put your product in a solving problem perspective rather than just a hard sell perspective. And if you can do that, then you will gain that rare, rare, rare piece of loyalty that is so transient in this day and age.
So, Dion, you mentioned something really interesting, and that is how Gen Z is entering government and more of the activism spaces earlier than previous generations. And one of those areas of focus is climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in that space?
Sure. I think it's been a remarkable switch or a flipping of I think public opinion. So if you think about it, I call 2020 the year of the pandemic, and 2021 was the year that we realized climate change was very, very real, and then it moved on into 2022. So 2022 has been really seen as a pivotal year in terms of extreme weather. So and if you just think back, say 4 years, just before the pandemic, Greta Thunberg was seen as this whiny teenager. It's like, oh, really just go and protest somewhere else. To suddenly in 2022, people understanding that if your roads start melting, you can't get supplies to whatever destination. The cold chain is affected. Freezing pipes stop, say, milk production. The human cost. I mean, in Pakistan, I think 33 million people were displaced in their floods, and we know what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal here as well. So it's become a very, very real thing, and I think for people to kind of see climate change still as a bit of a sort of a tree hugging exercise, and yeah, it's not really going to happen to us and it's not going to affect us. We have been given a very, very definite packet of evidence to say it is actually undermining the bottom line of many, many companies. So especially the brands and things that Bizcommunity work with, it's really, really important. It's not just a distant way of doing things. It really affects people. It affects people, like I say, in terms of disaster management, in terms of flooding. Insurance premiums have shot through the roof because people are now starting to see there's claims, for flooding, for car accidents that happen during, flooding, all of those kind of things. So it's affecting business in a very, very visceral way. So we can't ignore climate change anymore, and especially in terms of once you get into a corporate or a multinational level, those companies can't just say, oh, we'll just kind of tick some boxes and our ESG ratings are going to be okay, because you will be found out and you will be named for greenwashing or whatever other washing you want to name. So I think that's also very, very pivotal in 2023 that we can't ignore, because it's become a great disruptor in our lives. So natural world being a big disruptor rather than technology being the biggest disruptor.
Mm. And what are some practical steps that perhaps a corporate who wasn't as climate conscious as they possibly could be right now, but what are some practical steps that they can take in the short term to help with climate change?
I think it's really to try as best to reduce or up those sustainability goals. We're seeing, especially in the fast fashion sector, they've been in the crosshairs for the past 3 years anyway, and we're seeing the kind of wastage. We're seeing a lot of new ways of repurposing, reselling, trying to use sustainable things, circular economies, all of those kind of things to be put into that, specifically in a fast fashion environment. And I think those things are really important because the more, if you look at it demographically, and we go back to Gen Zs again, if you look at the spending power of who's coming into into that shopping area, the consumer area, are your Gen Zs. They are part of the workforce. They're earning their own money. They're going to spend, but they're spending very, very differently than a Gen X or an older generation. So again, this is your new customer. They're very, very different. They look at rewards, benefits, everything in terms of work very differently, but they will also be very, very different consumers. And you can't use the same old kind of marketing strategies to appeal to this generation because they will shout you out and they will call you out on something.
Wow, thank you so much, Dion. This has been such a phenomenal conversation, very insightful, and I'm sure that anyone listening to this, it'll put a lot of things into perspective for them for this year and the future to come. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Rutendo. Nice chatting to you.